it's not. Check. No.
Check.
Check. Good morning to everybody. Praise the Lord. Even as we are continuing to spend time in His presence all these days, let's once again come to the feet of Jesus this morning. And let's seek His face and let us pray. Father, we just thank you, Father, for this morning. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Father. We just worship you. We just praise your holy name. What an awesome God we serve. Thank you, Father, for this wonderful privilege, O Lord, that you have given to us to be seated at your feet. You said, come, all those who are heavy laden, and learn from me. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I'm meek and lowly. And therefore this morning, Father, we have come to your throne to learn from you. And even as your children here and all around the world who are joining us, Father, even as we have come, we thank you, Father, once again for yet another day in the land of the living. Father, you have kept us alive, and we believe, Father, it is because of a purpose. And I pray, Father, that Lord, even as we spend this time in your presence, O Lord, worshiping, praising, listening to your word, I pray, Father, that you would minister to us here in this place. And the omnipotent God and the omnipresent God, Father, will touch and minister through your Spirit to all of your children joining all around the world. Father, strengthen us during this time. Exhort us, encourage us, and build us up. Thank you, Father. Commit this entire time into your hands. Father, let your name be exalted and glorified. For you said in your word, if I be lifted up, I will draw all men unto myself. And I pray, Father, that all of us in the ministry, O Lord, here, Father, we will lift you up.
Amen.
And that you will draw all men unto yourself, O Lord Jesus. We thank you. We praise you, Lord. We worship you. We give you glory. In Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. He walked where I walk, he walked where he stood where I stand. He felt what I feel. He understands. He knows my frailty. Shared my humanity. Tempted in every way, yet without sin. He walked where I walk. Oh, he stood where I stand. He felt where I feel. He understands. He knows my frailty. Shared my humanity. Tempted in every way, yet without sin. God with us, so close to us. God with us, Emmanuel. Oh, 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 God with us, so close to us, God with us, Emmanuel. One of a hater race, stung by the prejudice, suffering justice. Oh, yet he forgives. Wept for my wasted years, paid for my wickedness. Oh, he died in my place. Oh, that I might live. Oh, God with us, so close to us, God with us, Emmanuel. Oh, 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 God with us, so close to us, God with us, Emmanuel. Oh, oh, God with us, so close to us, God with us, Emmanuel, Emmanuel. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be the name of the Lord, Most High, Most High. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be the name of the Lord, Most High. Oh, holy is His name. Holy is the name of the Lord. Holy is the name of the Lord. Holy is the name of the Lord, Most High, Most High. Holy is the name of the Lord. Holy is the name of the Lord. Holy is the name of the Lord, Most High. The name of the Lord, the name of the Lord is a strong tower, the righteous run into it, they are saved. The name of the Lord is a strong tower, the righteous run into it, and they are saved. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be the name of the Lord, Most High, Most High. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be the name of the Lord, Most High. Jesus is the name of the Lord. Jesus is the name of the Lord. Jesus is the name of the Lord. Jesus is the name of the Lord, Most High, Most High. Jesus is the name of the Lord. Jesus is the name of the Lord. Jesus is the name of the Lord, Most High. Oh, the name of the Lord. A strong tower, the righteous run into, and they are saved. The name of the Lord is a strong tower, the righteous run into it, and they are saved. The righteous run into it, and they are saved. Lord, we thank you this morning. Thank you for your name, Jesus. Your word says, Father God, that there is no name under heaven by which we must be saved. And Lord, we thank you for your name, Jesus. We thank you, Father. We thank you this morning, oh Father God. We thank you for we have gathered unto that name, Jesus. We've come in that name, Lord. Lord, I come in no other name, oh Lord, this morning. Father, we come in no other name but in the name of Jesus. Thank you, Father God. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. Oh, my one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. Lord, I come, I confess, bowing here, I find my rest. Without you, I fall apart. You're the one that guides my heart. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. Sin runs deep. Your grace is more. Where grace is found is where you are. Oh Lord, where you are. Lord, I am free. You're the witness, is Christ in me. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every heart I need you. You're my one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. Oh Lord, oh I need you. Oh, I need you, Lord. Every hour I need you. You're my one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. Oh, how we need you, Lord. Lord, we need you, Lord. Lord, I need you. We need you, Lord. Help us to focus on you, Lord God. Help us to see the need of the heart, Father God. That you are the need, Father God. Not anything else, oh Lord God. Lord, we might want to turn to something else to meet that need, Father God. But Lord, you only can feel our hearts, oh Lord. You only can meet our needs, oh Lord Jesus, this morning, oh Lord God. In this desperate moment, oh Father God. You only, Father God. And Lord, I need you, Lord. Lord, I need you, Lord God. I confess this morning, Father God. I need you, Lord. You can also confess your need this morning. Just confess your need for Him this morning. Oh Lord, I need you. Lord, I need you to stay focused, oh Lord God. Lord, I need you, Father God. I need you. I need you, Father God. Oh Lord Jesus, how I need you, Lord. Oh, I need you. Oh, I need you, Lord. Every hour, Lord, I need you. You're my one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, oh, I need you. Come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our God, our Maker. Come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our God, our Maker. For He is our God, and we are the people of His pasture, and the sheep of His hand, just the sheep of His hand. Oh, we come and worship. Come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our God, our Maker. Oh, come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our God, our Maker. For He is our God, and we are the people of His pasture, and the sheep of His hand, and the sheep of His hand. For He is our God, and we are the people of His pasture, and the sheep of His hand, just the sheep of His hand. One thing that I desire of the Lord, one thing that I desire and I will seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord, to behold your beauty, to inquire in your temple. In the secret of your presence, you shall hide me. One thing that I desire of the Lord, one thing that I desire and I will seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord, to behold your beauty, the secret of your presence, you shall hide me. Oh, one thing that I desire of the Lord, one thing that I desire, and I will seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord, to behold your beauty, to inquire in your temple, in the secret of your presence, you shall hide me. And now I praise you for the awesome privilege to see your glory in the house of the Lord. And now I worship with everything within me, to behold your beauty, to inquire in your temple, in the secret of your presence, you shall hide me. And now I praise you for the awesome privilege to see your glory in the house of the Lord. And now I worship with everything within me, to behold your beauty, to inquire in your temple, in the secret of your presence, you shall hide me. One thing that I desire, one thing that I desire, and I will seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord, to behold your beauty, to inquire in your temple, in the secret of your presence, you shall hide me. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art, O Lord my God. When I in awesome wonder consider all the works thy hands had made, I see the star, I hear the rolling thunder, thy power through all the universe display. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. And when I think that God is Son not sparing, sent him to die, I scarce can take it in, that on the cross my burden gladly bear, my sin. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Oh, Father, we thank you, Lord. Thank you for your greatness, Father God. Lord, we as a church, as believers, oh Father God, when we look around at all that is happening, oh Lord, we only see your greatness, Father God. Lord, like we heard yesterday, Father God, we can only see your greatness, oh Lord, your power at work, Father God, in our society, Father God. Lord, how we are just mere men, Lord God. Lord, we are just mere men, and Lord, you are God, great, so great, how great you are. Father God, we cannot even fathom, Lord, words cannot tell how great you are, Lord God. So Lord, through the blood this morning, oh Father, we just magnify you this morning, because Lord, with our own frail minds, oh Father God, it is impossible, Father God, that we will magnify you. It is impossible that we will sing of your greatness, oh Lord. So through the blood this morning, Father God, we just magnify you. Oh, just magnify him this morning. Just praise him this morning. Just glorify him. Oh, through the blood, Father, we magnify you. Through the blood, Father God, we are able to glorify you, oh Lord. Hallelujah, hallelujah. How great you are, Lord God. Oh, you are great, oh Lord God. You are majestic, oh Father God. Oh, majesty in all your ways, oh Father God. We thank you, Lord. We thank you, Father God. Hallelujah, hallelujah, Lord God. Oh, Father God, help us to stay humble, Father God. Help us to see, Lord, ourselves as mere men, oh Lord God, and not to think highly of ourselves, oh Father God. Oh Lord, you said humble yourself under the mighty hands of God. And Lord, you said you will lift us up in due season, oh Lord. I pray, Father God, in this season, oh Lord, we will stay humble. And after this season, oh Lord, help us stay humble, oh Lord God. Oh Lord, help us still, Father God, help us. Oh Lord, magnify yourself, oh Lord God, even during the ministration of the word, Father God. Lord, be magnified. Oh Lord, that you will be magnified in the word, Father God. Oh Lord, that Lord, we will all decrease, oh Lord, that you might increase, oh Lord. Hallelujah, Lord. Speak to us, oh Lord. We're all waiting, Father God, to hear from you. And Lord, even as you speak to your servant, oh Lord God, be glorified, oh Lord. Lord, you said that your servant will be sanctified, and Lord, you will be glorified. Thank you, Father. We bless you, Lord. We bless you. Praise you, Lord. We worship you. In Jesus' mighty name. Amen.
Hallelujah. Let's pray. Jesus, we just thank you once again this morning. Thank you, Father. We come to you in the name of Jesus. How great thou art, O Lord. Yes, truly, truly there is none like you. There is no God like our God. Under earth, on the earth, under the sky, there is no God like our God. Forever, O Lord, your throne is established in the heavens. Forever. Yes, Lord, your kingdom rules over all. You're sovereign. Many kings may wear a crown, but you reign. You reign, Lord. You reign. You reign, O Lord. And this morning, we want to come once again to your presence in the name of Jesus, through the body and the blood of your Son, to the throne room of grace that you have made possible for us by the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross, that we could obtain mercy and grace, especially during this time of need. Oh Lord, we need you. Yes, Lord, we need you. And Lord, I confess, oh Lord, and that I'm absolutely inadequate, oh Lord, to even proclaim your word, Father, but you chose me, and this morning I just want to humble myself. I pray, Lord Jesus, that Lord, even as we meditate upon your word, even as we study your word, grant us the spirit of wisdom and revelation, not the thoughts of man, not my thoughts, Lord, but your thoughts. For your ways are not our ways, your thoughts are not our thoughts. Father, I pray, Lord, that you would, Lord, truly grant us revelation this morning and the understanding of the times that we are in, so that we will be prepared. To that end, I pray, Lord Jesus, that even as we meditate upon your word, speak to our hearts, anoint us, speak to our hearts and prepare us. Continue to prepare us, Father, and use us in the days to come for your glory. We praise you, we worship you, for in Jesus' name, amen. The Lord is speaking to all of us, amen. And everything that we have learned over the years, I'm telling you honestly, I'm excited because the Bible has never truly come alive for me more than these days. No, it's unbelievable. Nah, it's like all the things that I've learned, especially after having come to our church for the past 12 years, everything is becoming relevant. At least to a greater degree. It was already relevant. It is getting more and more clearer, even as I, look at the things that are around and see how things have changed. No, all the nations have forgotten God. Truly, no. They're saying 2020 Olympics. No, they're saying 2021 we'll still call it 2020 Olympics. And they have already planned for 2024 Paris, 2028 Los Angeles. They've already planned. You see how hardened man is. They never factor in God. They think that things will go on as usual. It's just an aberration. But God is speaking to all of us. He's blowing the trumpet, right? And woe to those who are ease in Zion. I'm telling you honestly, it is not so much for the world, because the world cannot understand. It is only we as the children of God have a perspective. Nobody else has any clue as to what is going on around the world. They can explain it off as a virus, but this is something else. God is screaming for our attention, and particularly the attention of his people. Proverbs chapter 19, look at verse 21. Look at what it says. Proverbs chapter 19, when I look at all these plans that people make, there are many plans in a man's heart. There are many plans in a man's heart. Nevertheless, the Lord's counsel will stand. The another translation, you don't have to turn there. It says, many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose which will prevail. The Lord's purpose which will prevail. Okay, and that's exactly what is happening. You said you made a lot of plans, right? You plan to go here, you plan to go there, you plan to do this, you plan to do that, and I shut in everything, my purposes. I hope we as a church will understand his purpose, and we will align ourselves with his purpose, even as we meditate upon his word. And why is this happening? And these are all, I believe these are redemptive judgments. It's like, birth pangs. Okay, so we need to be prepared, because that day is approaching, and it's very, very, very near to us. And 1 Peter chapter 4, let us read from verses 17 to verse 19. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 17 to verse 19, it says, for the time has come for judgment to begin at the house of God. It starts here, starts with us. It is not just a house as a church, but individually and as also a corporate church. God is telling, it's time for us to start shutting down everything and begin to examine our own hearts, because we are the house of God. We are the temple of the living God, and we are also together the body of Christ, the temple of the living God. We are the church of the living God. We are supposed to be the pillar and the ground of truth. What has happened to us? Are we really truly the pillars and the ground of truth? Are we truly acknowledging the fact that we were supposed to be the light to this world? Are we really judging our hearts? We believe and we trust and we behave as if we are the sons of the living God. Continue to judge ourselves, and these are all redemptive. They are not judgments which God is saying, I'm going to send it and I'm going to destroy. These are all redemptive, not destructive, but redemptive judgments. Thank God for His timing. And he says the judgment to begin with the house of God, and if it begins with us first. Okay, so this is it. What will be the end of those who do not obey the gospel of God? And verse 18, now if the righteous one is scarcely saved, what will happen to the ungodly and the sinner? Where will the ungodly and the sinner appear? Therefore, let those who suffer according to the will of God commit their souls to Him in doing good, as to a faithful Creator. So, see, that's of course a quotation from Proverbs chapter 11, verse 31. He says, righteous will be scarcely saved. In other words, the righteous will be. Look at Proverbs 11:31 to understand what it means. Proverbs 11:31. Look at what it says. It says, if the righteous will be recompensed on the earth, how much more the ungodly and the sinner? And God is doing it. He's disciplining us, and He's redeeming us. He's sending judgments to the redemptive to bring us back to Him. Okay, so don't lose heart. Thank God He's sending these judgments into our lives so that we can take notice. And He's screaming. Okay, look at what it says. Let's turn to Amos chapter 3 today this morning, and let us read from verses 1 to 8. Amos chapter 3, verse 1 to 8. Hear this word the Lord has spoken against you, O children of Israel, against the whole family which I brought up from the land of Egypt. That's exactly how God introduces Himself. I brought you out of the land of Egypt. And if you look at, you just do a search, if you have some incredible Bible apps these days, just put in quotes, I am the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt, and you'll see an incredible lesson that you will learn. And God says, I am the one who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Don't have any other gods other than me. I am the one who has brought you out of the land of Egypt. Be a holy and a separated people unto me. Okay, so many things we learn. And He's reminding us. So how do we as a church apply to ourselves? We are the people for whom Jesus Christ died. We believe that. We are the people who have accepted Him as a Lord and Savior. Jesus Christ is the Lord who died for the whole world, for the sins of the whole world. Not only our sins, but the sin of the whole world. But we believed it, and we came under the blood of the Lamb. And we accepted the fact that He was the one who, we were supposed to be the people who should have died in His place, but we have accepted by faith the work of Jesus on the cross. And He says, yes, He's bringing us back to that. And let's read on. Verse 2, you only have I known of all the families of the earth, therefore I will punish you for all your iniquities. Let's just stop there. We'll come back to Amos chapter 3. Because I have known you, of all the families of the earth, I'm going to bless you, no? Look at the contrast. Because I have known you from all the families of the earth, I'm going to comfort you, I'm going to encourage you, all that is fine. But because I have known you of all the families of the earth, what am I going to do? Punish you for your iniquities. When I read that, some people say, my God is not like that. Scripture clearly says, consider the goodness and the severity of God. Knowing the terror of the Lord, we persuade men. Okay? Nobody can pluck you out of my hand. Scripture also says, if you do not continue believing, I will cut you off. So I am not a person who's going to make a doctrine out of one verse and just run with it. No, I'm going to read the scripture completely. It is written, nobody can pluck me out of God's hand. It is also written, what? If I'm once enlightened, And if I keep on sinning, there shall be no more sacrifice for sins. I read all. I'm going to read the whole counsel of God. I'm just not going to read one part and make a doctrine out of it and say, once saved, always. I'm not going to read that way. Sorry, please don't put words into my mouth. I just want to read the Bible. I'm not questioning anybody's doctrine, but I'm not from Bible college. So I only read the scripture, and I've studied the Bible for myself. And I've been taught this way to read. Samagranga chadavali mottam Bible. That means you have to read it holistically. Don't just read it one part and just go and run with it. And don't say, okay, my God will not do this. He's a good God. Yeah, because he's a good God. So he will punish. No, this word punish, sometimes when you look at it, who likes punishment? Nobody likes punishment. Everybody wants to run for their life. So what does it mean when you look at this word punish? What do you get? No, and as I said, I like to delve into words a little more. When I read this word punish comes from the Hebrew word pakad. Pakad. Hindi mein pakad liya. Okay. Tujhe pakad liya. Now, what does it actually mean? It has several connotations, but I just want to look at three. Of course, first is the word punish, which you can think punish mula to danda leke marna. Second, I will pay attention to you. Third, I will visit you. What will I do? I will pay attention to you. I will visit you. Turn to Genesis chapter 21 verse 1 to get an idea as to what is going on over here. And the Lord, what? Visited Sarah. That is what the word pakad means. Punish. Did the Lord punish Sarah? No. He came to Sarah and he completed her. I'm okay? Okay. See, I visited mean I came to Sarah and I want to complete her. I want to see something, what is missing in Sarah. And what was Sarah before she was Sarah? She was Sarai. What was Abraham before he was Abraham? He was Avram. What does Avram means? Father of, exalted father. Abraham means the father of many nations. You know what? There is there's an alphabet called He in the Bible. Okay, Aleph, Bet, the Hebrew Bible. Hebrew alphabet has 22 alphabets. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, He. He is the fifth word. He means breathing. Okay, it's a very interesting thing. It's got a gap. It's got a window from which God breathes. So God breathed into Abraham. Abraham was absolutely dead. He could not do anything to create something of God in his life. Sarah was, her womb was dead, the deadness of Sarah's womb, right? She could not produce anything which is of eternal value. She was absolutely dead. And Jesus says, we were all dead in our trespasses. And what does God do? He comes to Abraham and he changes his name and he says, Abraham, I'm going to breathe my spirit into you and I'm going to change your destiny. Sarai, I'm going to breathe Hey into you. I'm going to make you Sarah and I'm going to change your destiny. I'm going to visit you and I'm going to complete that which is lacking inside of you. That is what punishment means. Do we like the word punish? There's something lacking in all of our lives, What is it? I want to pay attention to you and I want to fill the gaps, in your life, See, this is my daughter's math pace. Okay, for all of you. Now, of all the subjects that she does, the first subject I pick up is not English, not creative writing. Bible reading, she's doing it. Okay. The one thing that I pick up is her math. Okay. She says, Papa, I got 100. I'm not really satisfied. So you know what I do? I go through a pace. What am I doing now? Paying attention. I say, so many mistakes in this page. What happened? Oh, you have a problem with word problems. Okay. Okay, what I'm going to do is, this is what I did yesterday when I went home. The half an hour, the fellowship that I had with my family, I took the math pace out, okay? Okay, she hates me for that. Sorry, baby. Okay, but Papa, this is only a silly mistake. I said, calculation error. I said, Papa, calculation error is a bad habit. Bad habit. I told you, right? Habits die hard. If you take off H from habit, you have a bit. If you take off A, you have bit. You take off B, it. That has to be completely. So what do? I pay careful attention. Now, in this space, of course, she's got 90 out of 100. Not acceptable, of course. Then I went to every page. I went through a checkup. I said, checkup, you got 95 out of 100. That should have been a red flag. That means you're not thorough. What am I doing? I'm visiting her and I'm paying attention to her, and what am I doing? I'm punishing her for her iniquities. What are iniquities? Not equity, inequity. Which is something which is not equal in our life. This is what math requires, and this is where you are. I'm bringing you up to step. You understand what I'm talking about? You see? What an amazing God we have. See, I being an evil father, can pay attention to every page in our math. How much more my Father in heaven will pay attention to every detail in my life? I'm interested. I say, what is this over here? You didn't understand probability. Oh my goodness. What is going on? You didn't understand what dozen is. Oh, dozen is 12. I'm going through every detail. Even a zero is important for me. The zero in the right place. Zero has no value. Nonsense. It has a lot of value. Oh boy. It's very, very important for me. What am I doing? I am closely watching every detail in her life. And she thinks it is what? Dad, you're punishing me. That's what she feels. But you know what I'm saying? I'm paying attention to her. You know, a lot of people, they want attention. They want God's attention. They don't know what they're asking for. Attention seekers. You want God's attention? Baba. And so he's saying to all of us as a church, he's saying, my dear brothers and sisters, I'm not my brother, Jesus is saying, my dear brothers and sisters, and God is saying, my children, I want to come and visit you. I want to see what is incomplete in your life, so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. So what is the pass mark to enter into heaven? 100. Sorry. 30-fold, 60-fold, 100-fold. But you know what the same parable in Luke's gospel will say? How many fold? 100. You understand? So punishment, don't think just punishment बोलो तो मुझे मार रहा है. नहीं. Attention pay कर रहा है. He is paying attention to every detail in your life and every minute detail. You see, that is a God. That's the reason why he says, God says, you build a tabernacle, okay? And build a tabernacle according to my specifications, and he gives the specifications to the T, and he says, Moses, I'm giving you all this blueprint, and you should find some people who will build it, okay, who will make this tabernacle. He chooses a man from the tribe of Judah. His name is Bezalel. You know what Bezalel means? The person who is hidden under God. That's what it means. From the tribe of Judah. And he is going to build the tabernacle. I'm going to fill him with the Holy Spirit and wisdom. And I've given you the blueprint, and he is going to build the tabernacle exactly to the specifications that I've given, because I want to come and dwell among you. And I'm what kind of a God? Perfect God. So I don't want to see iniquities in your life. I can't tolerate them. It's a small thing, God. No. It's a small sin, no. You know, I'll tell you something. Some sins in the world, he might let people go. But in his children, even the minute detail is important to God. My dear brothers and sisters, that is my God. If you have any other God, I don't know which God you are worshipping. Oh, we are already clothed in the righteousness of Jesus. I'm already complete. Sorry. You see, you're only taking one part. As I said, you are only taking one part of scripture. And this also says the bride has made herself, her garments ready with, she has done it. No, she has knit her garments. What are these garments? The righteous acts of the saints. Purge out the old leaven inside of you so that you may be made a new lump as you are truly are. That is the truth. You are already a new lump in the sight of God, but purge out the old leaven which is inside of you. Purge it out. Not to, small little leaven. One leaven is enough to leaven the whole lump. You just keep that one sin, it is enough. And therefore God is coming, and therefore He's giving us this time. Why is He giving us this time? David says, Lord, search me and try me, seek me and see if there is any wicked way in me, and lead me into the paths of what? Everlasting life. You see, this is very important for us to understand. So therefore, don't have this negative connotation about punishment. Punishment means God is paying attention to us and He's giving attention. You know what? He says, I want to pay attention to you. You fellows are always running. It's like, it's like, I want to teach you math, Abigail. I want to teach you math. Dad, I want to go for this coaching, tennis coaching. I want to teach you math. Dad, I want to go for music class. Dad, I want to teach you math. Dad, I want to go to this class. I want to go visit this friend. I want to visit that friend. You have all these avocations, right? I want to teach you math. Dad, I'm not available because I've got so many other things to do. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to shut down everything now so that I can teach you math. Why? Because I want to pay attention to you, my dear brothers and sisters. He says, that's what He's telling all of us. I want to give my attention to you. And can you imagine, so many of us, right? If you have an excellent music teacher, to employ him, how much you have to pay? You have to pay through your nose. Right? Why? Because if He's giving you time, He and some musicians are hard taskmasters. The way you play the piano, first of all, the posture, they will look at the posture. In my home, when people, especially my children, when they're studying, I don't know about other children, I'll come to that later on. When my children are studying, their posture is very important to me. Emanuela has this habit. I said, what is that shit sitting first? Get up. Sit properly. Oh, no, let's do it now. First, the posture is important. If you incline your ear, your posture is important. Don't be obtuse. Obtuse angles. Indifferent. Incline. So God is, what is He doing? He's asking for our attention so that He can give His attention to us. Okay, posture is important. So we need to be ready for that. Therefore He's shutting down everything. He says, give me your ear so that I can attend to you. What an awesome God. See, we pay through our nose for all these fellows who promise, or if you send your child to Narayana, guarantee seat JE. We and the GTC will not give you any such guarantee. But if you come into our school of learning, the probability for you to enter into heaven is high. That's what every coaching center will say, no? If you come to our coaching center, and if you all follow all the guidelines, if you do your homework, if you do all these things, the probability of you getting into IIT is very, very high. Why? Because we will have tutors, we will have teachers, we will have all kinds of people who will give attention to your child. And what do? We pay through our nose. But when God says, my attention is free of cost, I just want your time. Of course, that is the price that we need to pay. There's no easy, there's actually, see, salvation, as I say, is free, but discipleship, you have to pay the price. You have to count the cost. You want God's attention? See, that's the reason why He never gave the crowds anything. Parable of the sower. Some fell on this ground, some fell on that ground, some fell on this ground. The birds of the air came, the thorns did this, and some had harvest. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. Gone. And then the disciples come to him and says, what's up with that? What was that? Let me explain. You give attention to me, I will give attention to you. But what is God doing now? He's giving us opportunities to choose Him. But will we choose him is a question. First question is that. So therefore, don't get worried with the word punish. Okay, punish is good. According to the Bible, biblical punishment is good. What does it achieve? Is a question. First, it reiterates his love for us. What does it do? It reiterates his love for us. Turn to Psalm 89 verses 30 to 34. It's a beautiful psalm which is like by Ethan the Ezrahite, who is singing. I mean, he's remembering the covenant that God made with David. Okay, look at what it says from Psalm 89 verses 30 to 34. If his sons, that is David's sons, forsake my law and do not walk in my judgments, if they break my statutes and do not keep my commandments, then I will punish their transgression with the rod and their iniquity with stripes. Verse 33. Nevertheless, my loving kindness I will not utterly take away from him, nor allow my faithfulness to fail. And then my covenant I will not break, nor alter the word that has gone out of my lips. What an awesome God. He's saying, you know what? I love you so much. I want you to get 100. You know, when sometimes my wife is very tough in her corrections, okay? Especially when it comes to her children, she is even more tough. I go through her exam, no? Abigail's exam. I go through her math pace and I said, Abhi, small calculation error, re. And she doesn't know. I mean, why am I so worried? Because I'm just not looking at her probability exam here. I'm looking at her if she gets into this college already, you know. What will happen if she doesn't get her foundation right over here? It's a small error. You know it. Why did you not do it? Jess, she knows the concept, Jess. I don't care. You know, some teachers are like that. I mean, not Jess. Jess is also trying to teach Abigail, okay? No, but you know what? I want her. Abhi, if you would have done this, you would have got 100. The joy of getting 100. You know, sometimes you need to know the joy of success. Okay. And God gives us those joys. Anyway, so you could have got it. I want to help you. And then I do a lot of things. I shout at her and I scold her. Why? Because I want to get 100. What to get 100? Want her to get 100. Because I love her. She's my daughter. Why? Second thing, so it reiterates God's love for her. And one thing, once we are God's children, nothing can change that. Abigail is my daughter, she's my child. She can deny that she's my child, but the fact remains that she's my child. You see, I can't stop being a father to her. I love her. So I'm concerned. And most of the times when you're concerned about your somebody, you get angry with them, right? Okay? When your child gets hurt, first thing is what? Oh, not careful. That is, irritation comes. It's good. It's a good sign. Anger is not always wrong. Your child. First, reiterates God's love. Second, Proverbs chapter 22, verse 15. Okay? Look at this. Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. Boy. The rod of correction will drive it far from him. You know what? We are actually fools. We are foolish people. We are not wise. We don't take wise decisions. We think that we make wise decisions. See, smartness does not necessarily mean that you are wise. A lot of smart people are fools eternally. You're really smart and really wise if you factor in eternity. If you are able to see the unseen, less like the way yesterday Pastor was encouraging and exhorting us. They saw the unseen. I mean, they saw the scene. There's a reality there. Okay. So, and we are all foolish. There is foolishness. How many of you think that you are very wise? None of us. We thought we knew everything. Not, we don't know anything. You know, that's what happens when I taught in the university for a long time. I mean, a long time meaning 8 years I taught in the university. You know, all these guys who come to my university, they are all like the cream layer, no? They're just like the top 1,000 ranks and 1,500 ranks, all very smart kids, no? But the problem is they think that they know everything. And they come to university, the first thing I dispel all their preconceived notions about university. Where do they come from? They come from people where from universities and from colleges and schools where they are been pampered and spoon-fed and everything, no? And they come to university and I look at them and I say, यहाँ पर ऐसा नहीं चलेगा. What is the syllabus? Whatever comes out of my mouth, you are accountable. What I speak in the last class, in the last minute, in the last second, also is a part of the syllabus. And you should see, the first year they think that they know everything. They come to university, they are at this level, engineering is at this level, and there's a huge gap that has to be, there's a huge gap. And after the first quiz and the first midterm or the first assignment, then they realize, everything comes to normal level. Then they will know, I thought I was a top. I thought I was a mega pond. I am nothing. I am a fool. What? One test was sufficient to dispel all false notions about your life. So that's exactly the reason why, you know what? God has to expose our foolishness. And then you know what he does? He takes the rod of his. First of all, to dispel all false notion about ourselves, God allows situations into our life and then he disciplines us. Okay, the rod of discipline drives it away. Foolishness is baludu sahajamuga murkhudu. That is what Telugu's translation is. Kya baat hai? By default, every baby is a murkha. In other words, a fool. By default. That's a default setting. So he needs to discipline us to take away foolishness from where? Heart. You think, see this, ultimately it is our heart problem. See, the heart has several desires. Wisdom is in the, not here, it is here. Knowledge is here, wisdom is here. Knowledge is in the mind, wisdom is in the heart. And that's the reason why wisdom has built our house. Knowledge furnishes the house. What did I say? I didn't say the proverb says that. Okay. Wisdom builds the house, knowledge furnishes the house. What is the whole point in buying furniture from IKEA and you don't have a house to put it? All is lying on the best bed, the best mattress, the best dressing table, all the tables you bought and you put it outside on your portico. Why? Because you don't have a house to put the furniture, your interior decoration. Wisdom is in the heart. That is the reason why, you know what Solomon asks? Give your son a wise and an understanding heart. The heart is important. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart. Then comes the mind. If the heart is not there, your affections, the core being should desire God. 2 Thessalonians 3:5 once again. What it says? Come back. 2 Thessalonians 3:5. 2 Thessalonians chapter 3 verse 5. We looked at it. Now may the Lord direct your hearts into the love of God and into the patience of Christ. So first, it reiterates God's love. Punishment. Okay. Rod of discipline. Reiterates God's love. Second, it drives foolishness from our heart. It shows us truly where our affections are. Where your treasure is, there your heart is. What do we truly treasure? What do we truly desire? We think that we may be desiring God, we may be desiring something else. That foolishness he has to take. Third, it shows, again, that God, if he doesn't discipline us, look at what it says again. Oh, Proverbs chapter 20 verse 30. Blows that hurt cleanse away evil, as do stripes the inner depths of the heart. You see that? Again, God is after your So what is he doing? He'll cleanse. This is so it's got what? He's reiterating our love, he's driving our foolishness, and he's cleansing deep. That is the reason why David says, you desire, don't have to turn there. You desire truth where? In my inward parts, and in my inward parts you make me to know what? Wisdom. It's the one which is inside that is important. Cleansing our hands, like Pastor was telling all of us, cleansing our hands is important. But what goes into our mouth does not defile a man. What comes out of a mouth comes from where? Comes from the heart. For out of the mouth, out of the heart comes what? Fornications, thefts, adulteries, all kinds of things come from the heart, and I'm out after your heart. Proverbs chapter 4 verse 23. Proverbs chapter 4 verse 23. Keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. The heart is a central part of your being, the core being. That is where cleansing is important. So Proverbs chapter 20 verse 30 will say, lashes and wounds, my translation, lashes and wounds scur evil, cleanse away evil, and as do stripes the inward parts. It shows us the inward parts. Turn with me to Hebrews chapter 4, please. Hebrews chapter 4. Let me show you. Hebrews chapter 4 and verse. Am I doing the right thing? Yes. Hebrews chapter 4. Yeah, verse 12 to 13. Sorry, suddenly I missed that. 12 to 13. For the word of the Lord is, first, everybody say living? Living. Second, powerful. Then, sharper than any double-edged sword, piercing the division of the soul and the spirit. See, that is what Pastor was talking about. There is something in the first level, there's something in the second level, and there's something in the third level. And what is important for us to be cleansed in the soul so that we can start discerning the things of the spirit, which is in the third level. Revelation is in the third level. Therefore, he who worships God must worship in the spirit and in truth. It comes from the spirit first and the soul next. Division of the soul and the spirit, the joints and the marrow. It is the discerner of the thoughts and the intentions of our heart. Cleansing. The word of God cleanses, right? That's what we see. The washing of the water by the word of God. The cleansing happens, you know why? Because there's a discerning that is happening over there. The living word of God and goes deep inside your deepmost part and says, you know, this is what your intention was behind that act. We are just not looking at the act, we are looking at the intention behind the act, and we are looking also at the thoughts that have made that intention possible and the act possible. The thoughts of the intentions. And there is no creature hidden from his sight, but all things are naked and open to the eyes of him to whom we must give what? An account. Therefore, lashes and wounds scur evil, and beatings cleanse the inmost parts, is what one translation says. So it's a cleansing that happens when we have disciplined. So it's a cleansing, right? That's what I said. He's visiting us. Why? Because he wants to cleanse us. That is the reason why he says, don't forsake the assembling of the saints. If not physically, then virtually. God has given us this virtual reality and this possibility that we can, doesn't matter which part of the world you are from and whatever time frame you are in. This is what we want to do. We want to examine our hearts in the light of God's word and say, Lord, cleanse me deep down, cleanse my motives, cleanse my intentions. Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart. Why? Because man's thoughts were what? Intentions and imaginations were what? Evil continually from his youth. And God says, my spirit will not contend with man forever. So he's giving us this time. It's an acceptable time for us, so that we can allow him to examine our hearts and cleanse us. What an amazing blessing, right? What an amazing blessing for all of us as believers. So 20:30 says, Proverbs 20:30, the lashes and wounds scur evil or cleanse away evil, and beatings go to the inmost parts and become a part of us. Then 29:15, Proverbs. Look, this is powerful. The rod and rebuke give what? Wisdom. But a child left to himself brings shame to his mother. Now, let me tell you something. All of us left to ourselves, what will happen to us? Do we automatically choose God? No. Left to ourselves, we will do anything but not choose God. But choose God. That is the reason why Jeremiah says, Lord, it is not in man to keep his way right. It is not in man. Left to ourselves, boss, we are going to hell. That is our trajectory, finally. And what we do in the process, we bring disgrace. That's what parents are, no? If I don't make you study now, tomorrow they will ask you, what is your son? Disgrace to me. Especially in India, we are all a shame-based culture. You know what my son is doing? Engineer. Big engineer. He's working for software company. Software company. Okay, software company. US, Apple, Google, Microsoft, MIT, Stanford. Why? That is what we see. That is exactly, God also has the same, desire. Each of us, he wants to be a trophy. Have you seen my servant Job? He wants to display us to the entire world, the entire universe and entire fallen angels. He wants to display us. And he also wants to display to his angels also. That angels also are trying to get wisdom from the church, Baba. He wants to display us as trophies. And therefore, you know what? See, it's amazing, right? If my daughter does well, boy. And think about it, no? For example, just giving an example. If, let's say, Abigail gets admission into Princeton. One of my dream destinations, okay? Okay, Princeton University. And she gets her I-20, an acceptance letter, and she sends it to me, and she gives it to me, and she says, Dad, look at my acceptance letter from Princeton. I've been accepted with a scholarship. What will I think? Thank God. It's not going to be difficult for her to get married now. Will I say that? Thank God she can make a living. Will I say that? You know what? It was worth it. All my sacrifice, all my labor, all my visiting her in her math base was worth it. She's my trophy. God wants to display every one of you as a trophy. Do we have that desire? Test my son, Job. Test him, Baba. None like him. Does Job honor God for nothing? Take away all this. Yes, of course, he visited Job also. And after he cleansed and purged Job, now look at Job. Can you touch him, Satan? No way. Now I know. This guy is a true guy. He can be displayed as a trophy. That is the reason why it says the world was not worthy of them. And one day God is going to display his trophies. That is the reason why as stars differ in glory, so will be my saints. He's going to display us as trophy. What does star mean? That will become a chukka in the heavens? No. So come in, there'll be like trophies shining for God. Yeah, Daniel chapter 12 verse 3. Thank you, Sam. Those who are wise shall shine like brightness of the firmament, and those who turn many to righteousness like stars forever and ever. Like stars, like, that's what medals are, right? Glory. Look at the medal, my medal compartment, my trophy compartment. That's what Roger Federer will say. Look at all the Grand Slams. Useless, ultimately. With all the trophies, he was a leper. Who? Naaman. And they don't realize with all these Grand Slams, he's a leper. And one day, you know what? God will take us leprous people, whom He has cleansed and through whom He has wrought glory for Himself, and He's going to take us into His trophy compartment and He's going to display it to the entire world. This is my trophy compartment. These are my people. Okay, so is it good for God now to visit us? Amen. Thank God for that. Now finally, Proverbs chapter 23 verses 13 to 14. Proverbs 23 verses 13 to 14. Do not withhold. I deliberately put this in this order because I want to get a message across. Okay. Do not withhold discipline from a child. If you punish them with the rod, they will not die. On the other hand, if you do not punish him with a rod, he will die eternally. You will save his son from what? You shall beat him with a rod and deliver his soul from hell. Now, why does God punish us? Ultimately, I want you to spend time with me in eternity. I want you to be with me in heaven. He scares us and He brings us back. That's a good thing, right? Death. So it is very important for us to be visited by God. Proverbs chapter 19 verse 18. Proverbs chapter 19 verse 18. Chasten your son while there is chasten your son while there is hope, and do not set your heart on his destruction. That is the reason why He is chastening us. There is hope now. In the death, who will give? In the grave, can anybody give thanks to God? That's what David says. Can anybody give praises to God from the grave? No. As long as you are here and alive, there is hope. Once this window is closed, there is no hope. It is appointed for man to die once, and then there is judgment. While there is hope, He wants to chasten us. Thank God, no? Thank God when we are chastened by the Lord. That is the reason why He says, when you are, some of you have been chastened, therefore many of you is weak, many of you is ill, many of you have fallen asleep. You have died before your time. Let us not die before our time. Let's allow God to visit us while there is hope. Why? Why is this important? Why is this important? Proverbs chapter 29 verse 1. 29 verse 1. 29 verse 1. He who is reproved, is it what? 29 verse 1? Yeah. He who is often rebuked and hardens his neck will suddenly be destroyed, and that without remedy. What an amazing warning to all of us. He's sending rebukes after rebukes, chastisement after chastisement. Pharaoh is hardening and hardening and hardening and hardening. Finally, he still hardens his heart and is running after God's people, and God says, now, finished. I'm going to get glory to myself. Even through this, what am I going to do? I'm going to break your neck completely without redemption anymore. That is the reason why He says in Psalm 32, don't have to turn there. Don't be like the horse and the mule have to be dragged. Look at this attitude, no? Exodus chapter 13 verse 13. 13. We know this very well. As a church, I'm sure we've heard it in different contexts, but every firstborn of a donkey you shall redeem with a lamb. And if you will not redeem it, what you shall do it? You shall break it. Why? This fellow is stubborn. Are we irredeemable? Is a question we need to ask. Why is it important? Why is the rod of correction important for us as believers? Why is it important? Why is it important for a rod of correction to be as believers? Turn to Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 12 onwards. We know this very well, and I'm going to read. Hebrews chapter 10, chapter 12. Sorry, Hebrews chapter 12 verse 4 onwards. Not 4 verse 12 onwards. Hebrews chapter 12 verse 4 onwards. Okay. You have not yet resisted to bloodshed striving against sin. Go on. Verse 5. For you have forgotten the exhortation which speaks to you as sons. My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor be discouraged when you are rebuked by Him. For whom the Lord loves, He chastens, and we know, we studied that, we understood that, and scourges every son whom He receives. Next verse. Verse 8. If you are without chastening, of which all have become partakers, you are what? Illegitimate. The Telugu word is very, very powerful. The word in Telugu is, you are of the wrong seed. We are all born of the seed of the word of God. You are of the wrong seed. You are of the father, the devil. All my children will be taught of the Lord, and whoever is taught of the Lord will come to me. And you're not coming to me, you know why? Because you're not born of God. Matthew chapter 13, verses 28 onwards. This is the parable of the wheat and the tares. Matthew 13, verse 28 onwards. But if you are, 13. Matthew 13, verse 28 onwards. He said to them, this is the servants, that is the angels will ask Jesus, who are these people, the tares? And who has done this? The enemy has done this. The servant said to him, do you want us then to go and gather them up? And you know what God says? He says, no. What does it mean? Don't go and gather. In other words, leave them alone. Right? Till what? Harvest. What is the harvest? End of the age. And he's going to send his angels from four corners of the world to find all the people who are the wheat and the tares, and he's going to separate them then. So how do we know that we are wheat or we are the tare? How do we know as believers? Simply, if we are not of the wrong seed, then we are being chastened by the Lord. If we are of the wrong seed, we are left alone. It's a very, very tough truth to handle, my dear brothers and sisters. If you are left alone by God, it says it's a very horrible thing to fall into the hands of the living God. If you are left alone to your own ways, thank God. That is the reason why He is a father to us. Thank God for fathers, no? Thank God for fathers who really take the place of the father in our lives and starts disciplining us. Thank God for shepherds. You see, in our school, we have a very strict requirement on. We expect a lot from our instructors. What we expect from our instructors is that you take responsibility for the child and see what is wrong with everything, every department of the child. Make it a holistic thing. And you have to have that passion to do that for a child. Otherwise, you just come for a salary. You see, when I went to university, teaching was my passion. I didn't do it for a salary. Okay. I used to handle the entire course myself, one course which is like 250 students. From the lectures to the lab, to the assignments. Everything, correction of the papers, everything I used to handle because I was passionate about it, simply because, and I wanted my students to enjoy what they're doing. So I used to go to the lab, sit with them, do the circuits with them, do everything with them. And I used to take responsibility. I'm responsible for you. And I'm interested, I'm visiting you because I'm interested in perfection in your life. I want you to have a holistic experience. So tomorrow if the university would not even give me a salary, I would still do it. You know why? Because I'm passionate, because I never did it for a salary. That's the difference between a shepherd and a hireling. You see, that's exactly the reason why, we were discussing yesterday in Numbers chapter 27, you don't have to turn there. Moses says, Lord, after I'm gone, I want a guy who's a shepherd to Israel, who will walk in and out, who will go for them in war, and who will really, really be with them, who will shepherd them, who will not be a hireling. No. Men of God, servants of God are not hired. Okay. Once they're appointed, they're never fired. Many churches, they will hire then fire the pastor. It's not going to happen that way. That is not true, genuine. That is hireling business. And what does the hireling do? When he sees trouble coming, he'll run for his life. In other words, he is not interested in the well-being of the child. You see? I don't want to be like that, no? So, this is important for us. That is the reason why Paul tells in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 14 onwards. He's like tough with them. No? He's like laying it on them. No? And he says, I do not write these things to shame you, but as my beloved children, I warn you. For though you might have 10,000 teachers or instructors in Christ, they're all in Christ, by the way. They're not just ordinary teachers, they're instructors in Christ. Yet you do not have what? Many fathers, for in Christ Jesus I have begotten you through the gospel. You know what he's saying? See, there are so many fantastic teachers on the internet. There are so many teachers. But none of them have a responsibility for your soul. They'll say, okay, fine, you can see. Take it or leave it. But why is a church important? Why is shepherding important? Because we are responsible for your soul. That is the reason why he says, Hebrews, those who are over you are worthy of double honor, and when they're serving you, let it not be a grief to them. You know why? Because they watch over your souls, and they have to do what? Give an account. And how many of the teachers on the internet can give account for your soul? No, not many. They just teach and go. But shepherds have to give an account. We need to ask ourselves, no, as men of God, as teachers of the Word of God. Like one of the things that I always get exhorted. Do you really have a shepherd's heart? Shepherd meaning what? He wants to go in and out. So one thing is to be a shepherd. Second, verse 16. Therefore I urge you, imitate me. Okay. For this reason, what did I do? I sent Timothy to you, who is my beloved and faithful son in the Lord. So there is a father and there is a son. Now Paul is a father, and he had so many people who were very close to him, and he had very few sons. And then he wrote Timothy, because you know why? That epistles to Timothy, the two epistles, one of the most powerful, beautiful pastoral epistles upon which the entire doctrine of the church and the running of the church stands, is because Paul had a son in Timothy whom he could mentor. So it's not just important for us to say, you know what, I need a father. Are we ready to be a son? Elisha said, my father, the chariots of God and the horsemen thereof. But he was a true son of Elijah. And Elisha also had another fellow. He also said, my father. But was he a true son? No. How many times should I hit it? 1, 2, 3. Enough? You should have done it 3 or 6 or 7 times till you destroyed the entire enemy. That's what we tell, no? 100 problems a day. Why do you think I brought this math pace? I said, Abigail, I'm going to type my assignment, I'm going to send it to you. And you're going to do it as homework. You have a lot of time on your hand. You're shut in. You're quarantined. So I got her math pace, so I'm going to type out in my afternoon time. You see? How many times? 3, 4, 6 times, 7 times, 8 times. Do it until you get it, boss. Oh, don't call me father and not do it. Why do you call me father? Why do you call me Lord, and do not do the things that I ask you to do? What's the whole point? 3 times. How many times should I do it? 3 times enough? I should do another time. That's exactly what that fellow said. Father, the chariots of God and the horsemen thereof. 1, 2, 3, enough. You know, that's a remarkable thing, no? How this Elisha does it. You know what he says? Take this bow. Okay, open the east window. You know how he makes him shoot? Come here, Peter. I'll show you. Turn this way. Imagine that I'm Elisha. Okay, he is that king. He's saying, hold it, okay? Hold it like this. Hold it. Okay? Shoot now. Literally, Elisha puts his hand on the king like this. And he says, come on, shoot now. Empowers him. That's exactly what teaching does. Come on, I'm going to be with you. Shoot now, come on. Learn to shoot properly. Learn to shoot. Strike the ground now. I taught you to shoot. Strike the ground now. How many times should I strike? You know what, Elisha? He wanted the best for his. Which father will come and do this, Baba? sit with you and make you practice and make you practice and make you practice. And finally you say, how many times should I do it? How many times should I come to church? How many times should I do it? Every day Bible study. Until you come to a point where coming to a Bible study, if you don't think that coming to a Bible study, your life is dependent upon it, you will never come to the Bible study. I tell children when they come to me for studies, right? How do you study? How should I study? You should study as if your life is dependent upon it. Then, ఒళ్ళు జాగ్రత్త పెట్టుకొని ఏం చేయాలి? చదవాలి. ఒళ్ళు జాగ్రత్త అని తెలుసు కదా మనకి. Means really focus, complete attention should come there. As if your life is dependent upon it. So, God is a father, but does he have sons? Is a question. So if you are a son, you know what? You will be happy when he is visiting you. I will visit the iniquities of my sons with stripes, but my loving kindness I will never depart. Thank God for that. So what is the end result? Let's go back now to Amos chapter 3. Amos chapter 3. I promised you I'm not going to end very fast today. I've got lots to go. Okay. Amos chapter 3. Ultimately, why is God doing that? Chapter 3. Verse 3 onwards. Can two walk together unless they are agreed? We'll just stop there. Can two walk together unless they are agreed? God is perfect. No, God doesn't have to change. Thank God he doesn't have to change. If a God is constantly changing, we are having a problem. I remember that we have a problem. I remember that beautiful example that Ravi Zacharias gave. Truth is by default what? Objective. It cannot change. Truth is absolutely something which cannot change. He says, just imagine there is a traffic intersection over there, and there's a signal over there. There's a pole on which the signals is the red and green and the yellow is there. Okay, and the pole is there, right there. And you come to a halt at the traffic signal when the red light comes. Okay. If you feel that the pole is drawing close to you, what do you do intuitively? You slam the brakes even more hard, right? Because you're saying, okay, my goodness, I'm just crossing, I'm shooting the light. So you slam the brakes hard so that you'll stop. You'll bring the car to a stop. Now just imagine if the pole is moving and you're stopping. What is hope for you? If truth moves, where is hope for you? If the reference point is gone, what is right and what is wrong? If God is constantly changing, that is precisely the reason why we have a generation which do not know his left hand from his right hand. That's exactly what God tells Jonah about Nineveh. They do not know what is right and what is wrong, what is sin and what is not sin. Why? Because they have changed. They have called darkness light, they have called light darkness. That is the generation that we are living in. And God is saying, you know what? I cannot change. I will not change. That is my nature. See, that is God. God says, I cannot change, but I'm a God who will visit you so that you can become like me and so that we can walk together. That's the whole idea. I can't change. Don't ask me to change. That's exactly the reason why. Why are we so tough from the pulpit? Even if we are erring, we are always erring on the side of safety. You know why? Because we don't want to conjure up and define a God which is out of our own imagination. Gods of this world can change. Tomorrow he can say one thing and tomorrow he can say another thing. But our truth cannot change. And we have to conform to him. And our truth is always going to confront you. Will contradict you. See, that is the reason why in every relationship, when do relationships become really active and healthy? When we deal with controversies. If there's controversy, that is the reason why God says, I have a controversy with my people. If you walk contrary to me, I will walk what? Contrary. That's exactly what he tells in Leviticus chapter 26. See, what is happening? We're busy changing God so they can fit us. No. God says, I cannot be changed. I am a God who will not change. I will not repent. That's exactly what he told Balaam. What do you think? That I'm a son of man that I should repent and lie? To change my mind? Sorry. I can't. I don't do that. So what is he saying? Agree with me. You agree with me. That is the Greek word symphoneo, from which we get the word symphony. Symphony is beautiful. I mean, symphony means a cappella is a symphony. Can I call it a symphony? A cappella is mildly. Okay, a cappella is like 4 people singing different parts. How beautiful it sounds. You don't need music. You don't need any accompaniment. Right? When people are singing parts, do we need accompaniment? No! That is all accompaniment. That's only a prop. God says, symphonize with me. If you don't have symphony, you have what? Cacophony. Cacophonic's the bard. And he says, tie him up, please, till he knows how to sing in tune. That's exactly what, a lot of worship leaders or people who are conductors of different big orchestras. When one fellow is going out of tune, you should see his face expression. And you know what he's actually trying to do? He does his face like this, hoping that his face expression will change the tune and bring it back to stead instead. That means, okay, at least, and then oh yeah, I'm doing the wrong thing, no? And then he starts doing it the right way. He says, agree with me. I am the one who's conducting the whole thing over here. And if the conductor is doing a lot kinds of different things, what will happen to the music, Baba? Can you imagine? Why do we pay through our nose to go to a concert and pay through our nose to listen to Itzhak Perman? Why? Because you know what? Because deep down inside of our heart we have this yearning that we have to symphonize with the Creator. That is the reason why he says you are God's what? Workmanship. What is workmanship? Poema. He's writing music. He's writing. What do you call that, Mozart? What does he call it? What do you call all those things? No. He's writing music. He's writing music. What is he writing? He's writing a music. He's writing a musical note so that he can sing along with us. So we have to agree with him. Can two walk together unless they are what? Agreed? Let me explain this to you with an example, what it means in different levels. First, just an example here. Matthew chapter 5, verse 21 onwards. You have heard that it was said, those of old, you shall not murder. Whoever murders will be in danger of judgment. But I say to you, that whoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be, thank you, Peter. Achi, let's do this. We're all learning how to sneeze also. Thank you, Peter. Okay. And I say to you, whoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of judgment. Whoever says to his brother, Raka, empty head, in other words, shall be in danger of the council, but whoever says, you fool, will be in danger of hellfire. Now, this is essentially what you're doing. You're judging your brother. It's like you have a animosity or something. This is essentially, you cannot agree. There's some kind of a disagreement with the brother. Okay. There's one level which you can understand this verse. Look at what it goes. And suddenly, it shifts the narrative. Look at what he says. Therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar and then remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar, go your way, first be reconciled to your brother and then come and offer your gift. Till here, you say, okay, fine, that means I should be reconciled to my brother. Unless and until I'm reconciled to my brother, God is not going to accept my offering, etc., 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 which is right, which is not wrong. That's a fantastic interpretation. But look at how he takes it a little higher. Everybody, agree with the who? Who's your adversary? No. Okay. Quickly. While you are on the way with him, lest your adversary deliver you to the judge, and judge hand you over to the prison, and you be thrown into the prison. Assuredly, I say to you, you will by no means get out of there till you have paid the Last penny. Now, think about it. He's comparing it with your relationship with your who? With your brother. And then he says, until you pay the last penny, unless you agree with who? He says, it's like this, no? You have to agree with your brother, meaning there's some kind of a disagreement, come to an agreement. Okay? Do we agree with God in every area? No. If we don't agree with God, what does He do? Ultimately, He will deliver us until we pay the what? Last penny. When will we pay the last penny? When will we finish paying the last penny? You know, one man of God, Trapp, his name is, I think, Trapp or something. He says, you know what he says? He says, let first, okay, you're showing a good works, right? First, we'll do one thing. First, you pay for your sins. And then God will pay you back for your good works. How much time will it take for you to pay for your sins? All eternity. First, you finish that eternity, paying for your sins, and then ask God to create another eternity so that He can pay you for your good works. Just imagine if God starts to have a controversy with you. And you say, okay, fine, I'll pay you. How much should you pay? You think your good works? See, your relationship with God will directly show your relationship with your brother. You're saying, I want to have a good relationship with God. God's saying, you see, there is a disagreement between you and me because you know what? You're not reconciled to your brother. There's something there. There's a controversy. You're not forgiving him. You have not forgiven him. There's bitterness in your heart. I forgave you. You want me to extend forgiveness to you, but you're still not reconciled to your brother, right? You have not forgiven him, right? I'll show you this. Why is this important, my dear brothers and sisters? Turn to Psalm 50. Psalm 50, are you there? Verse 16 onwards. Look at what it says. Verse 16 onwards. Yeah, thank you. You are ahead of me. Okay. Don't be ahead of me. Be with me. But to the wicked God says, what right have you to do? Have you to declare my statutes or take my covenant in your mouth, seeing you hate instruction and cast my words behind you? Next verse. When you saw a thief, you consented with him? What? You agreed with the thief? And you have been a partaker with what? You have agreed with an adulterer. You have given your mouth to evil. You have agreed. See, that is the reason why do we say people don't go to movies? I mean, pay your nose to go to the movie. Why? Whenever you go into a movie, when you paid for it, you're agreeing with it in some level or the other. You cannot say, I have a filter in my brain which will only accept the good and take away the bad. Nonsense. Don't give me all that. Like I remember, I think Pastor was talking about Richard Wurmbrand. When Richard Wurmbrand's wife was persuading him to go take her to the movie, he said, no. And she said, why? It's a very good movie. And you know what he said? If at all there is something in that movie contrary to the scripture, I would have paid my money. In other words, I would have given my consent to it. I do not want to agree with it. I do not want to put myself in a position where I will agree with this, which is absolutely contrary to the word of God. No, I'm a man of God. I cannot do that. What argument can you do with a man of God like that? No wonder he was persecuted. You give your mouth to evil and your tongue frames deceit. And then he says, you sit and speak against your brother. You slander your own mother's son. These things you have done, and I kept silent, and you thought that I was altogether like you. You have made me in your own image, and I'm not like that. Sorry. I don't change. You agree with me. I don't agree with you. But I will rebuke you. And what will I do? I will set them in order before your eyes. So my dear brothers and sisters, agree with God. Agree before it is too late. And if you don't agree with him, you will not be let go of until you have paid the last penny. Last penny. And do we have the sufficient deep pockets to fill God, to pay God back? What can you pay God, my dear brothers and sisters? Your good works? Your good works? God says, first let us settle the sin account first. You pay for your sin first. Then I'll pay you back for your good works. Wages of sin is what? Death. So you know what we have to do? Before we reach that council, we have to do an out-of-court agreement with God, where we accept that He will pay our price. And when we say, you know what, Lord, you have paid the price for me. I have accepted your gift, your salvation as a free gift. Thank God for your mercy. You know what we do? We also start extending mercy to others. Otherwise, you know what God will say? Until you have paid the last penny, you'll not be let go of. And that is the reason why, you know what, one of the psalmists will say, Lord, if you should mark iniquities, who can stand before you? And there is what? Judgment, so that you may be, there is mercy with you, so that you may be what? Feared. There's mercy, so that, can you find that verse, if you don't mind? I just forget that verse. Just give me 2 minutes. I like that verse. I'm not able to get it at the top of my head. 130 Psalm, and verse 4 and 5, I think. Verse 3 and 4. If you, Lord, should mark iniquities, O Lord, who can stand? But there is forgiveness with you, so that you may be feared. You see? Agree with God, my dear brothers and sisters. Otherwise, you'll have to pay. Pay. In other words, there is no salvation apart from a free gift. And if you have accepted the gift from God as a free gift, that's exactly what He tells right in Matthew chapter 18. This fellow owed so much to his master, and the master forgave everything. But when he goes, he demands that he should pay. He goes to his servant, and he demands that he should pay back. And he puts him in prison. You know what my master says? Take this fellow and put him out. Put him out. Agree. That's what we call as God has paid the penalty for our sin, right? And accept. Luke's Gospel chapter 7 verse 27 and 28. This is he of whom it is written, behold, I send my messengers before you, who will prepare your way before you. Okay, actually, 27 onwards, okay? For I say to you, among those born of women, there is no greater prophet than John the Baptist, but he who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. Let's move on. And when all the people heard him, even the tax collectors, what did they do? They justified God, having been baptized. You know what he said? Lord, you are right. What has justified been? We agree with you, Lord, that we were sinners. Not by our works, but it is your work. And therefore we go into the waters of baptism. You know what? Whenever we go into the waters of baptism, you know what we are doing? We are saying, Lord, we should have died in your place. But we acknowledge the fact that you took our place. Therefore we declare that you are just. And we agree with you. You are just. Living, he loved me. Dying, he saved me. Buried, he took my sins far away. Rising, he justified, freed me forever. One day, he's coming back. What? Oh, glorious day. That is how we agree. And what happened? Next verse 13. But the Pharisees and the lawyers rejected the will of God for themselves, not having been baptized by the baptism of John. And then you know what Jesus says? And then what should I like in this generation? What are they like? They are like children. Wow. Can you imagine calling Pharisees children? Are mere pillalra. Bachcha gallu meeru. Ado bachcha hai re. Can you imagine calling a Pharisee bachcha? You're like children. No wonder they hated him. calling to one another, saying, we played the flute to you and you did not dance, we mourned to you and you did not weep. And John the Baptist came neither eating bread nor drinking wine, and you say he's a demon. Son of Man came eating and drinking, you say he's a glutton, a wine bibber, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. But look at this, wisdom is justified by all our children. You see that a lot of, I don't want to go into the details, but you know what? Agree with him. Justified means agreeing with God. What is justification means? God has accepted you. He has agreed with you, not because of you, because of you believed in his son and you agreed with his work on the cross and you believed saying, Lord, you should have died in my place. And I accept that as a free gift, and God says, okay, fine, now I'll let you go. But now that I have let you go, what will you do with your brother? Will you forgive him or not? So that is what agreement means. Second level of agreement, Romans chapter 8 verse 5 onwards. Romans chapter 8 verse 5 onwards. We have time, right? Another few minutes, okay? Romans chapter 8 verse 5 onwards. For those who live according to the flesh set their minds on the things of the flesh, but those who live according to the Spirit set their minds on the things of the Spirit. For to be carnally minded is death, and to be spiritually minded is life and peace. There's a fleshly mind. So like Pastor was saying, flesh is a state of mind essentially. Spiritually minded is life and peace. And then because the carnal mind is what? Contrary to God. It is enmity with God. It will not agree with God. It cannot submit to the law of God. And therefore, what we need is a transformed, renewed, continuously being renewed mind so that we can start agreeing with God. But the problem is, the mind has an attitude. Usko attitude hai. He's got an attitude, man. The mind has an attitude. Ephesians chapter 4. Verses 21 onwards. You are not in the flesh, but in the Spirit, if indeed the Spirit of God dwells in you. Ephesians chapter 4, sorry, Ephesians chapter 4. 4:21 onwards, okay. If indeed you have heard him and have been taught by him as the truth is in Jesus. Beautiful, no? That you put off concerning your former conduct and the old man which goes corrupt according to the deceitful lust, and be renewed in the, NIV will use the word, spirit of the mind, attitude of the mind, because what does it mean? Mind has a mindset. It has a set. Mind set. It is set in a particular way. It has got a point of view. It has got its own opinion. It has got an attitude. It's like, I told you, that's Vivekananda. Into the camera. I mean, I can do all that now because I'm before the camera. I like acting, by the way. I'm not acting right now, but I write my characters well. You see, what is that? He's got an attitude. He's got the Vivekananda pose. Who are you to tell me? Who are you to tell me? He says, be transformed in the attitude and the spirit of your mind, because your mind has a spirit. It has got an attitude. Be transformed there. How do we get transformed? Romans chapter 12 verses 1 and 2. We know that very well. This is how we agree with God, my dear brothers. And that's what we are doing. So first 1 and 2. 1 and 2. Therefore I urge you, brothers, in the view of God's mercy. So when you actually agreed with God's mercy, means you have agreed, right? You have agreed that he should have died in my place. So you have agreed with him. That now that you have received God's mercy, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. And do not be conformed any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. That word transformed, rupantaramu in Telugu. Rupa antaramu. Rupa plus antaramu, rupantaramu. Savarna dirgha sandhi. Okay, Rupantar means be transformed. Like it's like a caterpillar and a butterfly. You know, that's a poem we have taught our children in our school. A wormy caterpillar becomes a butterfly. Remember that whenever butterflies flutter by. Be transformed. Metamorpho. One of the Christian schools in Thirumalgiri, its name is Metamorpho. Boy, I like that word. So of course, it's been run by a pastor, so he has to name it like that. Metamorpho Learning Center. That means if you come, send your children there, they'll be transformed. That's the point. You see that? Transformed. How do you transform them? By the renewing of your mind. It is not the removal of the mind. Now that is exactly so many, and that is the problem. Like pastors keep telling, that is the problem with many Pentecostals. It is the removal of the mind. It is the renewing of the mind, not the removal of the mind. Until you have the mind of Christ, you start thinking the way God thinks. In other words, you know what? How could Paul write scripture? Boy, look at the autonomy. It is not that Paul agreed with God. God agreed with Paul. Which is better? Which is at the higher level? It's just imagine, I'm Pastor James and I'm the assistant pastor, pastor is the senior. It's like just giving you an example. I agree with pastor. Big deal, you're the assistant, but he's a senior. You have to agree with him. On the other hand, he says, I agree with Vijay. In other words, if I were preaching in Vijay's place, I would have said the same thing. That is agreement. Paul, he was writing so much of the scripture, you know why? Because God says, I agree with him. I agree. Amazing, isn't it? And that is the reason why I'm baffled with this guy, no? What a guy. And we have the confidence to say, we have the what of Christ? The mind of Christ. I don't know, can we come to the point in our life, the audacity to say, it is my opinion, but I believe that I'm speaking the mind of Christ. Whoa! Boy! And God says, yeah, that's true, please, I agree. Please write that. That's going to become scripture now. Wow. You see, you think that God is a joy killer. No. That he wants to take away autonomy. No. He wants to transform us so much into his likeness that he wants to begin to agree with us. What do you think, Vijay? What should we do? Can you imagine? Okay, we have a situation here, Vijay. What do you think we should do? Lord, you know. No. I know, but I just want to see. And just imagine that guy will say, oh, okay, Lord, I think we should do it this way. Yeah, I agree. That is where he wants to take us to. And so when we say he's going to confront us, good for him to confront us. You know why? Because he wants to transform us into his likeness. And therefore, take every effort so that you can preserve this relationship. What? Make every effort so that you can preserve this relationship of walking with God. It's a privilege. It's a privilege. It's a tremendous privilege. It's a humility of God. He says, I want to walk with you. Can you please walk with me, please? But unfortunately, I can't change. You have to agree with me. Second Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14 onwards. 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14 onwards. Do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. What is that? Don't be unequally yoked with unbelievers. Be yoked with who then? With Christ. Take my yoke upon you and learn. In other words, yoked to Christ means what? Be yoked to people who have Christ in them, so that you can learn. Don't just get yoked to people who are in Christian in name only. Who's your friend? Mary. But she could be very contrary. Just because she's Mary doesn't mean that she agrees with God. No. Yoked. find yourselves people who can challenge you, who are at a higher spiritual level than you. Deuteronomy chapter 22 verse 10. Not 22, 22 verse 10. What does it say? Thou shalt not, it's not, it hasn't come, Sam. Add it. You shall not plow an ox and a donkey together. Who doesn't agree? Donkey. Ishmael is a wild donkey of a man. And first of all, God has to reject Ishmael and create an Isaac. We all have an Ishmael in us. Donkeys we are. A wild donkey accustomed to the wind, it says in Jeremiah. A wild donkey, the word accustomed is disciplined to the wind. It is disciplined to do the wrong thing. That is also discipline. A discipline to do the wrong thing. Can an Ethiopian change his color or a leper take away his spots? Can you do good who are disciplined to do evil? You're disciplined, you're set in your ways. Think about it. Donkeys only can agree with donkeys. No, they don't. They're going in two different directions. That's the reason why Ishmael says he's a wild donkey of a man. Everybody's hand is against him and his hand against everybody. Donkeys don't agree with anybody. They want to be independent. Autonomous beings. Autonomous donkeys. Let's go back. 2 Corinthians chapter 6 verse 14. Don't be unequally yoked. In other words, it's interesting, right? Don't be unequally yoked. That means you cannot equalize it. Impossible. and therefore he says, he's going to give he made a statement. What is the statement? Do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. And then he gives reasons as to why should you not do that. First, what fellowship righteousness has with lawlessness? Nothing. It's a rhetorical question. In other words, there cannot be any fellowship between righteousness and lawlessness. If you're righteous, you're not lawless. If you're lawless, you cannot be righteous. And what is God doing in us? Through the teaching of the word of God, he is taking away the lawlessness in us. Turn to Romans chapter 6, please. Romans chapter 6. Excuse me. Verse 20. Sorry, verse 19 onwards. 19 onwards. I speak in human terms because of the weakness of your flesh, for just as you presented your members as slaves of uncleanness and of lawlessness, leading to, you see, you're becoming more. That is the reason why he who is unrighteous, let him be unrighteous still. You are deceiving and you are being deceived. Both are happening simultaneously. You cannot deceive others and you think that you are walking not in deception. You are also being deceived. It's unbelievable. You think people, when you gossip about people, do you think people are not gossiping about you? If that is not true, then there's an inexorable law in the universe. It's called the law of sowing and reaping. If you sow slander, I don't know what you're reaping. If you sow unbelief, if you sow whatever it is, lawlessness leading to more lawlessness, so now present your members as slaves of righteousness leading for holiness. For when you were slaves of sin, you were free in regard to righteousness. That means you were not even concerned about righteousness. You were free to do evil, as I said. You are free in lawlessness, whatever that lawlessness was, whatever that freedom was. Next verse. What was the fruit? Verse 22. The end of those things is dead. But now, having been set free from sin, you have become slaves of God, and you have fruit to holiness. What is holiness? Separation. The end is everlasting life. Go back to 2 Corinthians chapter 6, Verse 14. What agreement, what fellowship has righteousness with Lord? What communion has light with what? Darkness. Can light and darkness? No, the thing is, what happens is, light has to dispel darkness. Okay. Darkness should not overcome the light. No. No. Light has to dispel darkness. Therefore, they cannot agree again. Just giving that argument. Next one. Next verse. Verse 15. What accord, as I said, can you accord with God? Christ with Belial. Belial. What is Christ with Belial? I'll show you. Deuteronomy chapter 13 verse 13 onwards. Who is Belial? I'll tell you. If it is there in the KJV is okay, no problem. Corrupt men. You know what that word corrupt means? Belial. Sons of Belial. Have gone out from among you and enticed the inhabitants of the city, saying, let us go and serve other gods which you have not known. What do? They entice you away from fellowship with God. They take you away. That's exactly the reason why it says the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches. Those are the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches. If that is your focus in your life, you know what happened? What has happened? You have become a partaker of Belial, because they are worthless things. Sons of Belial means worthless fellows. These are all worthless idols. That is the reason why Jonah has to say, those who pursue after worthless idols, what do they do? They forsake their own steadfast love, their own mercy. Sons of Belial. What accord? That means, boss, if he's not taking me to God, I do not want to go there. That's a worthless thing. Idols. Next, go back. Verse 15 of 2 Corinthians chapter 6. Or what part has an unbeliever with an believer? No. And what agreement has a temple of God with idols? For you are the temple of the living God, as he said, I dwell in them and I walk among them. I will be their God and they shall be mine. What does God want to do? As I said, I want to walk among you. So create a tabernacle according to the specifications that I have shown you, so that I can come and dwell among you. Therefore, you need a Bezalel in your life who will create a tabernacle in your heart, in your life, so that God can come and make his presence felt there and he can be comfortable there. You know what happens if that place is not according to the specifications of God, and if God comes? Destroy. That is the reason why Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, you don't have to, and 7, he says, if this is the temple of the living God, if you do not honor this temple of the living God, God will what? Destroy it. Why? The presence of God is there, and it is it's not been prepared according to my specifications. When I come there, I am going to fall on you and you'll die. That is exactly the reason why he says, you know what? Moses, you go there. I will send an angel. If I come, these fellows are stiff-necked people, and if I come and dwell among them, I will fall on them and kill them. But he says, no Lord, please Lord, you come. Then he says, okay, fine, you want me to come? Then you have to prepare a tabernacle according to my and you read the book of Deuteronomy. After the tabernacle, he says, according to the pattern showed in the holy mount, Moses did everything according to that. And Bezalel did everything according to what Moses commanded him. And then he says, finally, the children of Israel finished the tabernacle according to the pattern showed to them, so that God can come and dwell in their midst. That is the reason why we agree with him. He doesn't agree with us. He will only agree with us when we have become like him. Otherwise, what will be our problem? What will happen? Amos chapter 3 now, verse 4. This is rhetorical questions. Can two walk together unless they are agreed? Answer is no. In other words, change the statement. Two cannot walk together unless they are agreed. And therefore, I have to agree with God. Thank you very much. Does a lion roar in the thicket when he has no prey? Answer: no. In other words, the lion simply will not roar. Okay. It will roar
to scare first, so that he can get a prey. And after that is the reason why the word is hege in the in the Hebrew. Hege, you know. It says, blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of those counsel, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doth he meditate. You know what the word meditate means? Hege means like a lion on its prey, you're gnawing and growling and eating it. Lions don't eat normally. Have you seen? That is the reason why it's called a pride. What is it called? Pride. It's jealous for its name. इसीलिए तो उसका नाम शेर है ना? So when it's eating its prey, it's rolling and eating it. And all the bunch of lions come together and eat it. And the master fellow will come and chase all the other fellows and eat it first. The male. The females do the hard work and the male comes in. Okay. But you see, it's they, and then he says, next verse. Verse 4 only, the previous verse. 2 lion. Will a young lion cry out of his den if he has caught nothing? No. You know what God is telling? I'm roaring. I caught you. I trapped you in your homes. What are you going to do? I was the one who trapped you, not the government. I'm getting your attention. He's telling the church, I'm getting your attention, my dear brothers and sisters. Jesus is saying, I'm getting your attention, children. I'm getting your attention. I want to give you attention. In order to give you attention, I am getting your attention by doing what? By roaring. What is this roaring? Sending a coronavirus. And look at the next verse. Verse 5. Will a bird fall into a snare on the earth where there's no trap? In other words, I have set a trap for you. I trapped you. And if you go out, you'll be spanked and sent back in. Right, Roshan? And the police going to spank you and send you back in. Will a snare spring up from the earth if it has caught nothing at all? Snare, spring up from the earth. Trap, no? Put. When will the trap say put? Remember when we put rat traps on our attic? And when it said tap, what happened? Chachindi. I caught it. And God is saying, I caught you. And then he says, if a trumpet is blown in a city, will not the people be afraid? And then this is the khatarnak thing, no? The icing on the cake. If there is calamity in a city, will not the Lord have done it? Aradam Visham. But thank God, we have been warned. By what? By who? Amos chapter 3 verse 7. Surely the Lord will do nothing until he has revealed his secret to his servants, the prophets. You know what? We've been warned for the time like this. Thank God, as a church. So what is genuine prophetic ministry? Genuine prophetic ministry is something which will not take you away from God, which will warn you about who God really is. He will warn you. And we need to take warning, my dear brothers and sisters. As I close, I want to show a very, very interesting episode in 2 Kings chapter 22, verses 16 to 22, and we will stop. Actually, chapter 60, 2 Kings chapter, oh sorry, not 2 Kings, 1 Kings chapter 22. 1 Kings chapter 22 and verse 4, first verse 4, and you know this very well. I'm not teaching anything new, by the way. All this I've learned, I've been taught, I also taught. So everything together, jugaad mix karke maine kiya here, aaj ka. So it says, so he said to Jehoshaphat, will you go with me to fight at Ramoth Gilead? Jehoshaphat said to the king of Israel, I am as you are, my people as your people, my horses as your horses. This is one king who's agreeing with. This is a ridiculous alignment. And because of this, he brings the sin of Israel into Judah. Let's move on. And you know that, right? Will you go with me to battle? And then he says, okay, let us inquire of the prophet of the Lord. And all the prophets are prophesying, yeah, go to Ramoth Gilead and you'll get it. And Jehoshaphat said, do we find another man of God over here of whom we can inquire? And you know what Ahab says? Yes, there is another man of God, but he always prophesies bad things about me. That means I can't agree with him. बहुत दुखी हो जाता हूं यार, उसका बात सुनने के बाद बहुत दुखी हो जाता हूं मैं. Then you know what Jehoshaphat said? Please, please, please don't say like that. Let us call him. And Micaiah comes and they call Micaiah and everybody says, oh, Micaiah, everybody's saying this, you also say that. No, he says, no, whatever the Lord says, I will say. Verse 16. So the king said to him, how many times shall I make you swear that you tell me nothing but the truth in the name of the Lord? First Micaiah comes and says, yeah, go, Ramoth Gilead, right? You go, you are going to win, Baba. And Ahab knows deep down inside of our heart, yahan par kuch to gadbad hai. Then verse 17 is powerful. Then he said, I saw all Israel scattered on the mountains as a sheep which do not have a shepherd. Thank God for us, right? Thank God for us. So many churches have sheep without shepherd wandering. Even if they have so-called pastors, they're not pastors, they're hirelings, many of them. Sorry to say. It's just a fact. It's a fact. And the Lord, when pastors' conference happens, right? I'm not saying I'm taking out names because I know it's so difficult. I've seen some pastors who have not changed over the years. It's same old. ఎందరో మహానుభావులు అందరికీ నా వందనాలు. Even sarcasm, they don't get it. Unfortunate. They're set in their ways. That's what he says. They're disciplined in the wrong way. Now, when you're disciplined in the wrong way, train up a child in the ways of the Lord when he is young. When he is very, very tender. Otherwise, you'll become like Ahab. You know what is right, but you don't have the power to keep it. And therefore, you want lies to be spoken. You want lies to be spoken into your life. It is not that you don't know what is true and what is false. No. You want lies to be spoken into your life. You want it. You have lost the ability to change because you have not agreed with God when you were tender. I saw all Israel scattered on the mountains as sheep that do not have a shepherd. And the Lord said, these have no master. Let each return to his own house. And then look at this. This is the next verse. It's scary. Scary. The king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, did I not tell you he would not prophesy good concerning me, but evil? But what are you doing? Didn't you know that God, when he sends a rebuke into your life, is visiting you? He is paying attention to you so that he can set your ways right? But you don't want to change. You're bent upon your ways. What will happen if you don't go to war? Sit down, get reconciled with God, agree with him. What will happen? What will happen if you don't work for a few days? What will happen? And sit at home and agree with God. Why are you bent upon your ways? Why are you bent upon evil? And verse 19, Micaiah said, therefore hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne. You see, I remember this beautiful example a pastor taught us some times back. There was a courtroom on the earth. What was a courtroom on the earth? Full of false prophets and one true prophet. You know what false prophets are saying? Zachariah will come and say, you go to Ramoth Gilead, you will conquer it like this, brother. You are filled with you are the righteousness of God. There's a courtroom on earth which is justifying you. But there's a courtroom in heaven which is calling you a false. You are not justified in the courtroom of God. You are found wanting in the balances of God. And because you refuse to accept the truth about yourself, what will God send into your life according to 2 Thessalonians, as we heard? A strong delusion. God has given you over to a lie now. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne and all the host of heaven standing by on the right and on his left. And this is what I like here is God is asking. Look at the next verse. The Lord said, who will persuade Ahab to go up that he may fall to Ramoth Gilead? What are your options? Can I ask the host of heaven over here, what kind of options do we have? Should we send an angel and slaughter all his army? No. Then maybe he'll repent. Should we send a pestilence among him? No. Pestilence, maybe the chances that he might repent. The point is, he will not even repent. He is bent upon his ways. And then a spirit came forward, stood before the Lord and said, I will persuade him. In other words, he wants him to go to battle and die. It's like, sons of Eli. The prophet comes and prophesies against the sons of Eli. It says, the decree of God was that he should destroy them. Now, nothing's going to change. The Lord said to him, in what way? So he said, I will go out and be a lying spirit in the mouth of his prophets. And the Lord said, you shall go persuade him and also prevail. Go out and do so. Sad. What happens is, the story is so pathetic, right? He still understands that this is true, but he's still bent upon going to war. He's bent upon his ways. And then he tries to camouflage himself. He wants to beat God. Can you beat God? No way. True prophetic ministry, my dear brothers and sisters, will make you agree with God. And if you don't agree with God, and if we are bent upon our ways, if we keep on sinning after we have received the knowledge of truth, there will be no more warnings. And therefore, when God sends us warnings, let us humble ourselves. Let us take the prophetic word. Let us begin to agree with him. The lion has roared. Amos chapter 3 verse 8. Final challenge. I love this. This is the ultimate word, no? Lion has roared. Who's that lion? God. Will you not fear? The Lord has spoken. Who can but prophesy? Several days left for this. And Pastor was saying, let us come out as a stronger church through this time of crisis. And therefore, Amos chapter 3, verse 1 will say, of you only have I known of all the families of the earth, and therefore verse 2, Amos chapter 3, verse 2. You only have I known of all the families of the earth, therefore I will, let's remove the word punish, I will pay attention to you for all your iniquities. Let us remove that word punish, and we will read it as I will pay attention to you, okay? This is God saying. Let's all read it together. You only have I known of all the families of the earth. Therefore, I will give attention to you for your iniquities. And you say, Lord, come, Lord. I'm attentive. Come, Lord Jesus. Come, Lord. Let us be like Samuel who say, Lord, come. Yes, Lord. Hear, O Lord. Speak, Lord. Your servant is willing to hear. Speak, Lord, for your servant is willing to hear. Speak, Lord, for your servant is willing to agree with you. Let that be our prayer. Father, we just commit ourselves once again into your hands, O Lord. We want to set our lives in order. Lord, we want to bring everything. We want to set everything in order. Father, we want to agree with you. Challenge us this morning, O Lord, that we will come to a point in our lives so transformed into the likeness of your Son that you will say, I agree with my son. My child over there, I agree with him. What he says is truth. Ultimately, our words will become your words. Because we will be so in line with the word of God and with the truth of God and with the person of Jesus Christ and with the Spirit of God. So in accord with him that we will truly be the extension of you. That when we act, you act. When we speak, you speak. That's what you told your disciples. Whoever sins, you're forgiven. You have forgiven. It will be forgiven them. Whoever sins you withhold, they will be withheld. Because we have come to complete agreement with you in every area of our lives. Challenge us to that and we pray. Yes, Lord, it is a long process. But Lord, speak, Lord, for your servant. We are your servants. We are hearing. Speak to us. Continue to speak to us, O Lord. Don't stop speaking to us, O Lord. Even through the evening meeting when Pastor comes and shares the word, pray, Lord Jesus, that you grant us all that attentive ears, that we will not leave this presence until we have heard from you. Speak, Lord. Don't pass us by. We thank you, we praise you. For in Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Okay, so 7:30 evening, Pastor James will be sharing the word. So come and join us back live. May the Lord bless you.